Hi, I am Mike Cooke. I am the CEO of Brandon Hall Group, and I am with...
Hi, I'm Dr. Ashwin Mehta, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mehtadology.
So I know we just got done with our panel on AI.
Very exciting panel.
It was.
Really had a great time doing it.
Well, I think I had a better time, and our audience certainly loved it. So thank you for doing that. So after, we had some other questions that were happening that we didn't get to necessarily have answered. What are some of the things you think CEOs should know about the CHO role as it relates to AI?
So CEOs have a tough time at the moment trying to demystify the landscape and trying to understand the impact of all the different types of tech that we have on their business. Now, as a CEO, as somebody who leads a business, we're both kind of in this situation. We have to think about what our business actually does, how our values translate into things like revenue and share price, and how we have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And understanding the technical landscape is one of many components. So we think about people, process, facilities, equipment. We also think about tech and data. Now, in the modern age, we have probably, and this is a little bit hyperbolic, right? But we probably have lots of companies that are tech and data companies that use tech and data to service a particular outcome or a particular client need. And being able to understand that value chain as it pertains to the modern landscape of technology is a difficulty for many CEOs. And as those CEOs are struggling with that entire landscape, they also need to be able to have that possibly hard conversation with all of the people leaders, so CHROs, CLOs, these kinds of roles, about how are we adding to that value chain with the activities that happen. And one of the key challenges that has been in this kind of human capital space for many years is how do we justify the investments that we make in tech, in initiatives, whatever those happen to be, in a way that relates to that bottom line, in a way that relates to that revenue, share price, and competitive advantage. And that's nearly always a difficult conversation because specifically in learning, we say, well, we're going to make this intervention. The intervention people will engage with, and then we kind of depend on this nebulous thing that is people, that is behavior, that is knowledge, that is capability, to engage with that initiative and produce value. So it's not a direct one-for-one relationship. We have this human in the middle, and humans are fuzzy things. So being able to have that conversation in a way that is not only empathetic to the discipline, but also has a strong focus on these outcomes, these business outcomes, business performance. I think that's something that's coming. That's something that is already happening, and I think that conversation is going to be a big part of that dynamic between these roles.
I agree. There's so much change going on. At our panel, we also spoke about DeepSeek and the ramifications. And David Chestnut from Accenture talked about how they're now trying to figure out what this really means. We know Mark Zuckerberg at Meta has organized around 4 teams and galvanized around figuring out if this is real. There may be some doubts about the stats, but basically the organization DeepSeek is saying they built in 2 months a large language model for $5.8 million. In our panel, usually these large language models cost up to $1 billion to create. So David from Accenture had made the point that this changes a lot because now instead of just super large 1,000 or 2,000 organizations that are able to build their own large language models, now it's open to everyone. And when I say everyone, I think of companies that are doing maybe just $100 million a year in revenues. Because globally, worldwide, there's over 120,000 companies that are at least $100 million or more in revenue. So now this opens up tremendous opportunities. But what do you think of DeepSeek, and why are you a little bit cautious right now from understanding everything that was announced 2 days ago?
So the caution is, of course, things were announced recently, right? So we don't have all the facts. The second part of the caution is that in pretty much any sector of industry, you have this high cost of being the first to market, being the first to do something disruptive. And then you have a slightly lower cost of being the follower. So that to some degree is foreseeable in the market. And we also have this idea that it's kind of Moore's law, where we say that computational power should get cheaper, should get more efficient as time goes by. So we expect these kinds of things to happen in the market. But when we focus on the fundamentals of business are going to be that if we have a purpose and we want to deploy technology against that purpose, we have a choice. Do we buy something? Do we build something? Do we have to buy something with a lot of governance around it? Do we have doubts? How do we validate our supply chain? And how do we select something that's appropriate?
Right.
So all of these things are still the fundamentals of business.
Yeah.
So does it change too much in the business sense? Probably not. I'm a little skeptical about that, because really for a lot of companies, and the way I view AI, I view it as like a force multiplier. You have a business, you do something that you're good at.
Yes.
You're probably not an AI company, probably not a large language model developer. You have a thing that you're good at, do that thing and let AI multiply the force of the thing that you're really good at.
Yes.
That's probably a better way to do your business than trying to be an AI company.
Yeah.
So when we have this conversation about, am I a small company in the middle of a town somewhere, in the middle of a state, and what we do is we ship items from here to there. So if we're in that business, then the thing we're really good at is moving that item from there to there. We can augment that with AI, but going down the rabbit hole of building a large language model and investing in that, it's probably not core business.
It's a lot of work. I kind of think of ERP systems, right? Organizations buy ERP systems, but they all require a tremendous amount of customization and service around it. I think that's probably what will happen with the large language model potential market that we've been talking about.
So the other aspect of this is when you build complicated tech, we can talk about large language models, we can talk about edge AI, we can talk about a lot of things. Let's just say complicated technology. When you build that, if you're working with a supplier and that supplier is building a thing, this complicated tech, for 1,000 clients, the cost base of development and maintenance, because maintenance is very important, and support and all of these things, is divided by 1,000.
Yeah.
If you have to build it for yourself, you have a cost base of one. You have to think about maintenance. You have to think about sprawling project costs.
Yes.
So taking something that meaty on as a project is probably not the best idea.
Yeah, no, I completely agree about it. With that, what else did we talk about that was important? We talked about everything that was important.
Yeah, so one thing that came up right at the end of the panel was this concept of bias and DE&I. And we discussed, or I gave a response, which was around if you are building, you're training, you're testing a model, and you have only one demographic that is working on this, it's easy to go down a rabbit hole of bias.
Yes.
And recently, and I think in day one of this conference last year, certainly, and I think we touched on it this year as well, there was DE&I conversation. And modern age in social media over the last couple of weeks, I think, I've seen a lot of going the other way. How do we maybe repivot?
Yes.
And it's an important conversation around bias when we think about training models, because a lot of the chat GPTs of this world, the GPT models that were trained, they were trained on the internet, which was predominantly a Western English phenomenon, a Western English data set. So we automatically get bias in these things. And to some degree, back to my previous comment, if we're not software developers, we're human capital organizations, or we do something else that's not software development, it's not really our business to be making those models. So we have to depend to some degree on the models that are available. And there are benchmarks, certainly in the EU, around how you can mark each of these models and how they perform. But it's important to understand that there could be bias.
Yes.
Important to understand how we could correct for that. So if we take a very simple example in L&D, we have, I might want to use, for example, Midjourney, which is an image generation tool. And I might say, we'll generate a successful businessman in a blue suit. And it might give me a white businessman. How do I correct for that? I would then specify in my prompt, well, I want this, I don't want a businessman, I want this to be a young Hispanic businesswoman in a blue suit. So I need to be more specific about what I'm asking. And that's a very, very simple example of understanding that the model has bias and then correcting for it so you get the output that you want. And we could be really complicated about how you correct for bias. But on that very simple level, that's just one example of how
the AI should eventually come to realize when it's prompted for that its next question should be, describe more about the person. What nationality is this person, and where are they coming from, and what's the age, right? But you're right about the prompts, because we work with prompt engineering all the time. And it's, we always like, all right, we did this, and now we have to get more detailed with the actual engineering prompt.
And that goes in two ways. So one is being very more detailed in the prompt, as you've mentioned.
Yes.
And the other way is I'm seeing prompt engineering becoming a little bit less important, because a lot of the software tools that have AI behind them have presets, have settings where there's actually a very detailed prompt behind that setting. But I'm going to say, I want this in the style of Gothic architecture. Click the button.
Yes.
And there's a massive prompt behind this that you don't need to create. So you see increased sophistication in the tool sets as well that allow you to correct for some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to use AI in different ways. Right now, we're looking at Agentforce to provide 24/7 client support, especially when we have periods where we're getting emails for requests, literally every single day, every hour, Saturdays, Sundays, and it's tough to get to them with people, with our customer service team. We think customer service is immensely important. I don't like to wait on things. I don't want our clients to have to wait. So those are things we're looking at. But one of the other things you spoke about, and we didn't get into a lot of detail, is creating workflows so you're more productive. And I was going to have, if I had time, I would have also asked the panel, what's your headcount growth going to look like over the next 2-3 years? How is that going to impact things? Are you hiring more people so they can skill quickly, or are they thinking of using AI so that the current team they have now, they can increase their productivity by 10%, by 100%, and hold off on the hiring? I'm not sure where. I'd love to get answers on that, because I'm just not sure, and that's the one thing I didn't ask. What do you think?
So for my business, I'm running a small business, and so I have 2-3 people that I regularly work with. Actually, no employees at all, right? And the structure is an ambition of mine, and I'm part way there, but I'm not fully there yet, is to have an agentic workforce that is the equivalent of about 50 headcount. And that has implications on things like a revenue model. So if you think about consulting, time and materials revenue models, you're effectively capped in how much revenue you can make per person. But if you could, and I would love to quantify this, and hopefully I'll do this by the end of this year, we'll see. But I would love to quantify that. Can I get a 5x, 10x, 50x performance difference in terms of things like revenue, or the things that I've mentioned around competitive advantage that can be quantified? Can I achieve that with an agentic workforce? Because when we think about an enterprise scale strategy, we would say we want an agentic workforce and a hierarchy, and this is where multi-agent models and swarm intelligence and things like that come in. We want a hierarchy of agents. That hierarchy of agents is going to need to work with a hierarchy of people, and we're going to need complementary synergies and skill sets and things like that. For a small business, it's very different, because I could say, well, my workflow for social media needs to be this, this, and this, and I'm just going to make that happen and have a human in the loop to approve it. My workflow for analysis that would have previously been done by a grad student, it needs to look like this. These are the types of analyses I need to do. These are the sources of data, and now we're going to get there. So all of these things, to some degree, can be automated and be slightly intelligent if we have an AI workflow. So it's a very exciting time to do all of that. And if I can get to 50, then I'll be reporting back and saying, these are the metrics. This is how I looked at it. This is how I've quantified performance, and this is what I've been able to do with the tool sets that we have now. In a year's time, the tool sets are going to be very different and a lot easier. So we have this very exciting time for businesses, probably at my scale, but also the huge enterprises and how they work with AI workflows.
So let me ask you an off-base question somewhat. Do you think you could write a best-selling book with AI, or an epic TV series such as Game of Thrones?
So I'll answer that in a couple of different ways. So one of the things I was looking at, and I looked at this in some depth, was writing a blockbuster video game. Slightly different.
Oh, great.
Now, I used to like playing role-playing games, so the Final Fantasy style games. And Final Fantasy VII came out in the late 90s, and I remember playing that, and it was, you move around a map, the map's been pre-drawn, you click on some characters, you get a speech bubble that comes up, and the character says something. So there's dialogue. You click again, you get a different bit of dialogue, but 3 times, and it's done. The latest iteration, Final Fantasy 16, I played that, and that was 3D environments. You wander around, you wander through a village, you have everybody's conversation that you can hear. The chat on the side is coming up with, I've just passed a bakery and they were talking about some bread, and it's a dynamic conversation that's happening. So the idea of building a world and having the dialogues and the scenarios and the characters and their rich backgrounds, and this lady's 35 and she's had a hard life and she's opened a bakery and her husband died and all of this stuff is actually there, and we're not that far away from being able to generate all of that dynamically with AI. Now, if we put that into a book format or a video format, AI generated video is coming up along very, very quickly. Generating cinematic quality video is almost there. Books, we've been able to generate books for almost 2 years now, right? So could you do something like that? Of course, you could get narrative structure, storytelling, you can build character personas, you can do all of that stuff. Could you, slightly different question, could you build a bestseller in 30 minutes? Because you can do a lot of things. Bestsellers, I don't know offhand what the attributes of a bestseller are. You'd have to pick a topic. You'd have to be thinking about what your audience is and all of this.
Think Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Stephen King.
Yeah. So I think it's possible. 30 minutes. I think I saw something on YouTube, and I'm just thinking if it's true, but I think I saw something where they did a comparison in an hour. So 30 minutes might be a little short. By the end of this year, could we do it? I think it's way more possible as the tech evolves.
So will people be able to tell, even if they can tell it's written with AI, will they care?
Probably not. So the example that I looked at was a screenplay, I think. And how much should you care? Because the purpose, we've got to think about the purpose. Always think about the purpose. The purpose of a book is for entertainment, for information, to make you think. And if a machine writes something that is... Here, we're in a darkened room and we have a couple of chairs around us and we have the curtains are closed. What could the weather be like outside, right? And you think about what the weather's like. That made you think the purpose has been achieved. So does it really matter that a machine wrote it? I'm not convinced that it does. So it depends on the purpose of the literature.
It depends on how you do the prompt. You could also do prompts of, in the style of J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter. I want to write a fantasy role play or fantasy book about, these young students that are coming up, but they're vampires versus witches or whatever. And I'm wondering if that's going to be like following the model of a successful bestseller for that demographic.
So there was a tool, I think it was called Game Gen, where they were looking at building. You remember the game Doom?
Yeah.
So they were looking at building that on the fly using AI rather than having coded or built the whole game. So they trained the engine on the original Doom game, and then as you go through, just generate it as you go. So it was a successful experiment. And we're getting into that realms of like, could we do this with ChatGPT or with Gemini or with one of the off-the-shelf models versus can we train a model on the literature of a particular author and then write in that style? And that you can do now.
Great conversation, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All our honor. Thank you.